Thank you for that fulsome introduction. So just looking around at all you wonderful people here tonight, I see a galaxy of talent, of people who are historical sponges. You want to absorb as much as you can of Ballarat history, but in particular tonight you have a railway bent. And you want to know about your favourite old railway, even though it probably, its heyday was long before you were born. So we'll get on to the matter of moment, the Buninyong Railway, 1889 to 1986. If we look at the historical context, particularly the rail context, and see where the Buninyong line fits. So it was a Johnny-come-lately in the Ballarat area. So we had the line coming up from Geelong in 1862 and a station here called Yendon, which was Buninyong East. The line then extended from Ballarat to Ararat in 1875, on to Creswick in 1877, out to Smythedale in 1883, east to Gordon in 1879, and out to Warborough. So Ballarat is sort of surrounded by all of these railways long before the Buninyong Railway was built. Now, Buninyong is a little place. It was founded before Ballarat. So you can see this image here in 1859, not much there. It develops by the 1870s and 80s and it's fully fledged township. But it's nowhere near as big as Ballarat. So can a little place like this justify having its own railway? Particularly since it's already got a station. So you doubting Thomases here, you might think, oh, well, that doesn't look like going on, but look at it. It says there, Buninyong. That is Buninyong East, which we now know as Yendon. So that was Buninyong's first main station. And it was put there at the junction of the road from Buninyong to Melbourne and the road coming down from Ballarat towards Lello. So it was very conveniently situated and it was very handy for people in Buninyong who wanted to go to Geelong or Melbourne. So it wasn't much use for anyone in Buninyong wanting to go into Ballarat. Train service was excellent. There were 2 or 3 trains a day, return trains. So you could hop on at Buninyong East and go to Geelong for the day or Melbourne for the day and get back home that evening. And all the goods, the bigger goods for Buninyong came through the Buninyong East station. But her local citizens said, that's not good enough. It's all very well having a station called Buninyong, but that's 6 or 7 kilometres away. And we need better communication between Ballarat, and I quote from it, its most beautiful suburban district. And this is, of course, a matter of taste. Of course it is. So there was lobbying by the local municipalities, politicians and business interests to get a railway through. The top advocates, the local mayor and member for Parliament, David Davies, and his fellow MP, George Young, who represented Smythedale. So the 2 electorates on this side of Ballarat sort of put their heads together and push for the railway to be built. So this was in the early 80s, a time of, you heard the word marvellous Melbourne. So everything was happening in Victoria in the 1880s. It was a boom time, the land boom was on. There was unprecedented prosperity. So anything was possible, whether of economic value or not, didn't matter. There was no business cases needed then, just needed a bit of political nous. And the political climate around Victoria was such that in 1884 the Railway Act was put through, and it's generally known as the Octopus Act, because there were railways planned for just about every electorate in Victoria. So nobody was to miss out. So here's a list of all of the railways authorised in the Octopus Act of 1884. Buninyong's there somewhere. So all of those, the ones highlighted in the darker font, I got this out of a book published in the 90s. They're the ones that are still left. All the others are gone. But that doesn't matter. It provided a tremendous boost for all over Victoria. So note the date, October 1884, the Act is authorised. The route, as specified in Parliament, basically just went from Ballarat East down to Buninyong. Pretty straightforward. But the works did not start for 4 years after the Act was passed, because the state had indigestion, railway indigestion. There was all those lines to be built, and there just wasn't enough sort of staff available in the railways department to do the surveying and so on, all of that. So it took 3 years before the survey was done, late 1887 and into 1888. The budgeted cost for the line was £30,000. The first site was turned in Buninyong on the 12th of April 1888 by the Honourable Davies. The line was to be 11 kilometres in length, so not a big deal. We look at some of the survey plans that the railways did. So we've got coming off the main line around across the main road and then heading due south. So this heading from Canadian towards Mount Clear. So as you can see, it's a fairly straight route until it gets to Buninyong. So coming around from Mount Clear, Mount Helen, it winds down around through those hills and ends up in Buninyong. So how much dirt did they have to move? A fair bit, depending on the area. So here's the start. That's the line. That's going over Specimen Vale. Eureka here, going across the flats to York Street. It's Eureka Street to Canadian. Canadian towards Mount Clear, so no dramas there. Mount Clear to Green Hill, again pretty straightforward. Green Hill to Mount Helen, we start a bit of a rise there, it's heading up. And then the tricky bit from Mount Helen down to Buninyong, we've got all these hilly bits here, having to come down the Barclay Street Hill at Buninyong, over a couple of dips and the Union Jack Creek, and then into Buninyong. So for the technically minded, what sort of engineering was? It was a light line specification. Victorian Railways was a very, well, it was a big organisation, and being engineering based, they wrote down everything. And covering the whole of the state with 26,000 employees, you had to put out lots of operating manuals and books and so on. And they used to put out what they called track charts. So this is the track chart for the Buninyong line. So you can see it here. So that chart has everything in it. The top shows the gradient profile, which is that bit. And then it tells you what sort of rail weights, everything like that, the number of track gangs. And right at the bottom is small diagrams. So the Buninyong Railway was exactly like all those other branch line railways in the country area. So they were light lines, 60-pound rail, 9 feet sleepers and 6 inches of gravel ballast. There were 16 bridges and culverts, 4 overhead road bridges, and a rail underpass at Victoria Street. The tallest bridge was over Union Jack Creek, which was 12 openings of 15 feet each. The height above the water level was 37 feet. And the bridge was in use until 1921 when it was filled in. There are 2 reasons for that. You can see the design is up and down piles. As engines and trains got heavier, there was deflector beams put in other areas, but here they decided they'd, rather than do that or renew the bridge, they would just fill it in. So they filled in the bridge and put a brick culvert under Union Jack Creek. That's why you can't see it now. So all well and good, the contract's signed, we're ready to start building. And isn't it going to be wonderful that the marvellous cities of Ballarat and Ballarat East are going to have connection with their sister symbiotic place of Buninyong. No worries, you know, we're on our way. The Victorian Railways planned to cross Victoria Street with a level crossing. But the civic leaders at Ballarat East and Ballarat, they condemned this proposal. It's a visual blight. I mean, here we've got this magnificent thoroughfare coming into Ballarat from Melbourne. Now, bearing in mind in those days, everything went by rail, not by road, but that doesn't matter. So we've got this wonderful boulevard, Victoria Street, and we don't want people coming in to Ballarat to be presented with a picket fence and then a set of railway gates and a gatekeeper's cottage. It's psychologically encumbering, isn't it? You're coming in, here's a barrier. We don't want that. So the railways were forced to change their way. So they said, all right, we'll put a cutting in. We will take the railway under Victoria Street and we'll put a road overbridge. They proposed a timber bridge. Railway standard would look good. But, you know, timber bridge doesn't suit Ballarat's dignity or culture. We want something better. So at great expense and a lot of delay, and they'd actually started building the wooden bridge. So the engineer was instructed to stop that and to design a brick and metal bridge, an iron bridge. So all the ironwork had to come from England. And the abutments for it, which were to be in brick, so more of the cutting had to be dug out. So that added expense and it added time. And then the railway's traffic branch, they chipped in and said, look, it's no good having the branch line coming off where it does, because we would need to put a signal box there and have double lines coming off the Warren Heath Bank. So the move was made to bring the junction back towards Humphrey Street, about 800 metres. So that meant they had to do extra earthworks from the original turnout all the way back to King Street. So that doubled the cost, £60,000 instead of 30, and it added that extra 800 metres or half a mile to the 11 kilometres. But Ballarat got the ugly railway put out of sight, out of mind. And today you can still come into Ballarat on this wonderful boulevard and not be impeded by anything, but you have no idea what is under that, well, the bridge is gone, what is under that particular part of Victoria Street. So the actual junction was at King Street, Here you can see the turnouts, the signals. A few of the local urchins hanging around to get their picture in the paper. So that was the turnout side. So the original junction was to be here. That's the three bridges. So there was the main bridge over the road and there were two pedestrian bridges at one side. So they were quite substantial structures. Now part of the rail trail, the central bridge is gone. It's been rebuilt when the highway was fixed up. But the two side bridges are there. So the rail trail is a wonderful feature. And Ballarat people are fairly proud of their heritage and history, but look at this. What have they done? What have they done? Well, the graffitiists have been there. Okay, that's not too bad. The original roadbed was down here, and all this has been filled in to create your rail trail. Good one, Ballarat. So here's the formation from Eureka Street to York Street. We've got Eureka Street there, the formation coming along to York Street. York Street station here, and there's the cutting leading on to Canadian. So there was a bit of earthworks in this part of the line. But the major earthworks were near Mount Helen. Now, as you can see, very, very deep cuttings to maintain the grade for the engines. And then coming down into Buninyong, you've got this enormous cutting here, and they've had to put two lots of signals so the train crews coming around could see the signs. So that's the construction side of it. When we look at how it worked, so there were a number of stations. Now, stations is a generic term, I suppose. Some of them weren't stations at all. They were just stopping places. So there was Eureka siding. There was York Street, right at the railway crossing. Levi, again at a railway crossing. Canadian, which had a proper station. Reed, which was at a roadside. Mount Helen, again a roadside, and Buninyong. So that's the actual route map. We've got Eureka siding there, York Street, Levi at Spencer Street, Canadian at Ellsworth Street, Mount Clear, stop Olympic Avenue, Reed siding at Green Hill, Mount Helen at Fiskin Road, and then coming round to Buninyong. So quite straightforward. So the services now, bearing in mind the line's only 11 kilometres long, it's not exactly the main line to Sydney, so all services were run as returns. No train was ever based at Buninyong. So the trains ran at Ballarat and they just did a routine return service. The journey time was 25 minutes. Now, I suppose you've all got cars, you get around, but some of you may use public transport today. So if you're in Ballarat and you think, oh, I might take that bus to Buninyong and have a nice lunch at the Crown, and you get on the bus in Ballarat. Now, how long does it take you to get to Buninyong? It goes here, there, everywhere, an hour or something like that. So we're going backwards, in the 21st century. So the journey time was 25 minutes. The turnaround time at Buninyong was 15 minutes. It stopped at all stations and other halts en route as required. The passenger car had an end platform with steps. That's for those places at railway crossings. And the ladder was provided for vans and cars to get in and out. This is a timetable in 1924, and it's fairly typical. The services hardly varied at all from day one through to closure of the passenger services in 1930. So there were 8 trains a day. They departed from Ballarat from 7:25 in the morning to 9:30 p.m. at night. On Saturday night, there was a much later train at 11:15 to allow people attending theatre or whatever late night entertainment was on in Ballarat. They say that the 11:15 on Saturday night was the drunk special, but it might have been. But I think it's urban myth. I've written lots of railway histories on all sorts of lines in Victoria and Queensland, and I can tell you, every late night train on Saturday is a drunk special. So am I tarring all the Buninyongians with the same brush, so that they're all inebriated when they got on the Saturday night train? So the motive power on the line was mostly tank engines of the C, N and F class. The F class of this sort ended up doing most of the work. So they were an end-to-end engine. It means didn't need to turn them, so it would run out to Buninyong. There was a turntable at Buninyong, but they never used it. They didn't need to use it. They just run around to the other end of the train and come back into Ballarat. They had to have the funnel trailing their direction to Buninyong because of the grades. And coming down the Buninyong hill, you wanted water over the crown sheet in the boiler. So that's another reason why they never turned the locos. They just run the one way all the time. So for years and years and years, there was 2 F classes, 174 and 184 that did the run. And later on, there was a AEC rail motor put on. Now, I wasn't able to find a photograph of the AEC on the line, but that's a typical arrangement. It's just a motor truck or bus that's fitted with a passenger area. So there we see a typical arrangement of a Buninyong train. So you've got a tank engine here, a guard's van with passenger accommodation, and what was called an American or Mallee car with the steps at the end so that you could get on and off. So in 1926, there were modifications put on because of falling traffic levels. And the railways put on a rail motor. So with the rail motor, you just needed a driver and a conductor to sell tickets. But with the steam engine, you needed a driver and a fireman. So you're getting rid of one staff member by having a rail motor. So the rail motor was employed elsewhere around Ballarat. So it ran to Buninyong in between jobs. So it was a bit of a sort of a mixed thing that the steam engine did some services and the rail motor did others. So it did 3 services, ex-Ballarat, at 9 in the morning, 12:10 and 2:40. The steamer handled the 7:27, the 1:15, the 5:05 and the 6:25 p.m. Now, isn't that a wonderful service, you know, almost suburban-like in city? The final schedule on the line was the rail motor running ex-Ballarat at 7:25 and 5:30. So when the rail motor came, the service dived. And it returned from Buninyong at 8 in the morning and 6 at night. So it was really only good if you were in Buninyong and wanted to come into Ballarat for work. So we'll look at how did the line perform and who were the big players. We look at the economics of passengers. It was primarily a passenger service. So we look at the big line is the total number of passengers. So we're getting shade under 100,000 journeys there, time of the First World War, comes along, and the mid-20s it starts a dive until it's finally extinguished. So who were the main movers and shakers? Well, it was Buninyong, the Green Line. So Buninyong itself provided most of the passengers. The other big performers were Canadian and the smaller stations that. So it basically Buninyong provided all the grunt for the line. When we look at the statistics, there were 60,000 outward passenger journeys per year. Just about all of that was commuter travel to Ballarat. The long-term average passengers was 58,000 per annum, which is a lot. Canadian was the next best with an average of 7,000 per annum. The peak year was 1913 with nearly 96,000 journeys. The peak 1913, the average number of passengers per train was 48.5, so 50 people on each train. And the train had capacity for 75 seats. So you could always get a seat. When we look at goods loadings, and basically it was only Buninyong that provided the goods tonnages. So we've got here the inwards is the green, and outwards is the yellow. So the inwards fairly consistent, a couple of thousand tonnes a year, then it goes up when Howard's box factory was opened, 1913 or 14. So Howard's did fruit cases, butter boxes, those sort of things, and they imported most of their softwood timbers. They all came by rail. And you can see there when that closed, the figures took a dive. There were industries at Canadian that got a little bit, but you can see there, follow the graph down to the right, but by the late 30s, just before the war, there's not much doing at all. Came up a bit just before the war and then just fizzled out. So it was a good performer for sort of 60 years or so, but after that it was a dead loss. So the actual station, the Buninyong stats, well, the peak period was 6,000 tonnes inwards, 1919. There was a rapid decline into the early 1920s and a free fall after that. The outwards was best from 1911 to 1923 when it averaged around 3,000 tonne. So the outwards was primarily dairy boxes, fruit and vegetables. The thing that sort of killed it was motor transport after the First World War and its proximity to Ballarat. I mean, why would you put something on the train in Buninyong if it had to be transferred to Ballarat? It just wasn't economic. Eureka siding was the best performer over time. There were industries there that used a lot for inwards and outwards. So this pic here shows some typical loading. You've got petroleum, briquettes or coal for the tile works. So lots of stuff in and out of Eureka. And it was basically, even though it was on the Buninyong line, it was more or less a Ballarat siding. So what did all the stations have and how did they work? Here's a drawing of Eureka. So this is after the line had been cut back. So in the early days it went straight through. There was a passenger platform there. There was a public siding here. First off, there was a line into the foundries. several foundries there which later consolidated into what we now know as millers, and there were sort of fuel depots. And later on there was a siding around to the tile works, Cowley's Ironworks. There were initially 3 foundries in the area, and they all amalgamated at one time and ended up under the Cowley banner. And they were a big user of rail, bringing in raw materials, steel, copper, and goodness knows what. A lot of fuel for the forges and so on, and they dispatched an enormous range of mining equipment, road making equipment, and so on. So it was a big concern. There you can see a view of it in its heyday, and the siding is, the rails are just there. There was a siding into the tile works on the south. So this tile works was originally at Lau, Otto Steinkraus then brought it into Eureka. So the closest bit of land he could buy was over the road from the Eureka Park. So this is the first, what are we doing here? Yeah, so that's his first tile works. And this is from a 1917 publication, and there's a bit of artistic license here. You can see all of this here. Well, that never existed then, but it looks good, doesn't it? So Steinkraus, and you might have noticed if you wandered around this part of the town that there's no clay pit. Where did the tile works get its clay? There's just no hole anywhere. Well, Steinkraus, and later on that there was a much bigger company formed. They were into all sorts of pottery ware, tiles and so on, and was fine ware. And they used washed clays from dredging areas, from gold mines and so on, all in the district. So they would get their clay from Creswick, up around Castlemaine, or wherever they could get it. So all of that came in by rail, and you can see the line there, the rail's coming in and there's the clay. The company was reconstructed in 1914 or so, and became quite a large concern. So here you can see it in its peak in the 1930s, I think. So you've got the original building here, extra bits added on. There's that sawtooth roof that actually exists then. Then out the back, you've got all the clay sheds. So the clay was brought in, taken to those sheds and allowed there to dry. The railway siding from Eureka is coming in here, which went right through to that previous slide I showed you. And there was another loading siding that came around here. And you can see the truck there that's been loaded with clayware product. So the kilns were originally fired with, I think it was wood, but after a while they went to briquettes. They were one of the first Victorian users of commercial quantities of briquettes when Monash started the SEC briquette factory in 1921 or whatever it was. So they used briquettes right through, so there'd be trainloads and trainloads of briquettes coming in. All of the stuff they sent out, most of it went out by rail until the early 50s. Then they switched to road. The other main component for Eureka was the oil sidings. So when the oil companies in the mid-20s started to go into distributing fuel, because motor cars were on the go then with the T-model Ford and all of that. So the only place they could find space was at Eureka. So the 3 oil companies put their oil depots here. And also George Farmer's bacon factory. He bought truckloads of pigs in, and there you can see the pig race. So the pigs came in by rail from wherever, they were downloaded there and they were herded along Eureka Street to farmers' works. So here we go, folks, quite a sophisticated city like Ballarat, and you've got herds of pigs walking down one of your main inlets. But hey, that's the way it goes. So the pig trade lasted till late 40s, early 50s. That's Eureka in 1970. So the pig trade has ended then. The oil depots are all still there. You can here, here and here, the tanks. The line into Cowleys are still there. That's used to be the main line through to Buninyong, and that was just used for storage of out of season, in this case cattle trucks, or wagons waiting repair at the Ballarat North workshops. So we look at these statistics for Eureka, and as you can see, it's quite a big loader. The green is the inwards, so we've got all of the stuff for the tile works, and then certainly after the war, you're getting all of this oil traffic. The outwards, the blue one, once the tile work started up in a big way in 1914, you get all of their outwards, and they lasted until the early 50s. So the other graphs, passengers, they had a lot until 1930. And we look at our good friends, the pigs. So lots of pig trucks from 1915 to 1954. And then the porkers called it a day. So that's Eureka Station in its final day. So on the left you've got some wheat wagons out of season being stored there, and on the right you've got the oil tankers. And today, just over the road from where we are, there's still some remnants of the sidings there. On the left is the tile work siding, and on the right is one rail into the foundry. So jealously guard those as historical mementos, and don't allow the council to fix up this street and take that out. But they probably haven't got enough money in their capital budget to do any street works around here, so I think we're safe. That's the next station was York Street. That's looking towards York Street stopping place in 1953. So not much there. The site of Spencer Street or Levi. So when this station was originally opened, or stopping place, was called Spencer Street, which would clash with the railway's main station in Melbourne, Spencer Street. So it was renamed Levi after the local councillor. So it was just a stopping place with the shelter, and it's still there today. That's just here. This is a goods train running between York Street and Canadian. This is March 1942. So the war's on. Big economic activity everywhere. But judging by what's on this train, there wasn't much doing at Buninyong. Got a truck of looks like coal. So the goods train service from Eureka onwards was closed in 1947. And it started as a pure goods service in 1930 when the passenger service ceased. So there wasn't much requirement for goods beyond Eureka. And that's why that part of the line was closed in 1947. The goods station of Canadian. So it was a proper station with a platform, passenger platform, and a shelter. I'm not sure when this photo was taken, but originally the shelter was twice the size of that. It had a portion here for the railway staff to do the safe working. Canadian was a good earner in some respects. You've got passengers here, the yellow one, lots of passengers, over 10,000 here, and then fell away. Inwards, not a lot, it's in bursts. So in the 1920s, there were some industries at Canadian. There was a sawmill, which probably got logs in, and there was a starch and soap factory. And the starch factory got a lot of potatoes in. And as where potatoes are all starch. But all of that industry, that was a burster. It collapsed in the 1920s. There you can see the layout of the place. So it's just straight through. You've got a loop, passenger platform, the starch factory, goods sheds, and then a spur siding off there. The oil tanks, that was a wartime thing. But when the passenger service ceased in 1930, everything was stripped at Canadian. So here we see the station in 1940, before the fuel depot was put there. So we've got here the foundations for the starch factory, foundations for the goods sheds, and what's left of the passenger platform. So one of the urban myths, and isn't history full of urban myths, is that during the First World War and the Second World War, troop trains came here and let troops off at this platform so they could go to the rifle range, because originally Canadian was called butts, the rifle butts. Now, that might have happened in the First World War, but certainly in the Second World War it wouldn't have happened because the platform's decommissioned. So what Canadian was most used for during the Second World War was as an RAAF fuel depot. So the RAF airfields in the district were at Ballarat and south at Cressy. And the policy was so that the Jap bombers didn't come over and obliterate any fuel storage at the airports, was to keep your main storage off-site. So in this case, it was Canadian. So, and one of the reasons was that Eureka was the fuel depot, but there wasn't room there for it, so they moved to Canadian, which is only a couple of kilometres away. So here's the situation in 1940. The fence here is the fence around the fuel depot, and there's the siding coming in. So there were 3 big tanks there. And it was a secure facility. It was fully fenced. They're patrolled by armed guards and so on. So the way it worked was that the petrol came in by rail, and road tankers would come in and fill up with fuel and drive to Cressy or Ballarat Airport. So when the fuel depot went in at Canadian, all other traffic was banned, so it was basically an Air Force siding. And that lasted through to 1946, when the Air Force abandoned it. And that was the end of Canadian. Mount Clear was the next station. It was a proper station with a platform, a wooden shelter, and an office cubicle. It had signals, it had a loop, and it had goods sheds. The passenger traffic here was more than 3,000 annual. The goods sheds was taken away in 1894. So the railways had some funny ways. I mean, they put a proper station here with a full-size goods sheds. And you wonder what on earth they hoped to transit through that goods sheds. So there was nothing. So the goods sheds, it ended up taken away to, I think it was Houghton or Beulah. The loop was closed in 1913. So that's what's left of the passenger place, the main line through here. And that was intact until the Earth Centre was built. And they bulldoze most of the platform or put earth on it, so that's hardly a recognisable feature anymore. The next station was at Reed. It was just a crossing station here on the, just a shelter here on the left. There's the line running through. Next station was Mount Helen. So the Buninyong Historical Society has a lamp here from Mount Helen. So at all these little stops, there was a shelter and a lamp and a flag. So if you wanted the train to stop, you waved the flag. At night time, you lit the lamp. And at one end, it's got a, used to have a colour glass there, red. So the train coming along would see the red light and stop for you. So Mount Helen, you know, wasn't much of a station. It was actually where the tennis courts are now, and there was nothing much doing there after 1925. Then we come to the main station, Buninyong. So it was a full-size station, had everything that opens and shuts for the day. So we've got passenger building there, the crane here in the goods yard, your signals there. And this must be probably a long weekend because it's a much larger train than normal. And the usual caper was around Ballarat during long weekends. People in Ballarat would get on the Buninyong train and come out here to the gardens. And the Buninyong people would get on a train and go through to the Ballarat gardens. Because in those days, the Buninyong picnic trains used to start at the gardens platform, which was out near where the grammar school is, somewhere along there. But being the historical sleuth that I am, I'd say that this is the 12 o'clock train from Buninyong because it's got a goods truck on it. So the way the timetable was worked, the passenger trains on every service except the midday one, which was a passenger train, but it was any goods for Buninyong, they tacked the goods trucks on. And the other reason I think it's a sort of picnic train is you can see all the drags there to take the people to the pleasures of Buninyong. So here we have, this must have been a bumper weekend. So there's an excursion train here with 2 bogie cars waiting at this platform. So the happy Ballarat people would return there absolutely exhausted after a day of picnicking and walking around Buninyong and jump on the train and head home. There was a turntable put there to turn the engines, but as I've mentioned before, most of the engines were tank engines and they didn't need to use the platform. It would have been used for the larger engines after 1930 when the passenger service ceased, and the AEC rail car would have needed to do it. There's a view of the passenger platform from the 5-footer pit. This is near Learmont Street here, looking towards Ballarat. There's the Barclay Street cutting. There's the full-size station. There's the railway station yard plan. And you can see here all the features. You had a turntable at one end and an engine shed. Well, they never had an engine located here, but there must have been just a standard plan that you did for branch lines. And so the draftsman put that in, but they never needed it. Then you've got the station building, which was 2 12 by 20 foot portables joined together with a ticket lobby in the middle, goods sheds, a platform for the goods, a cart dock, and end of the line at Learmont Street. The biggest industry to use rail at Buninyong was Howard's box factory that started in 1913 and went through to 1926. There's the rail siding on opening day, and there's the some of the staff. So if you count them, there's over 40 staff there, so it was big business. That's their log yard. You can see all the logs coming in by rail and being unloaded there, and over the back is all the shooks and the cut pieces for the boxes. There was a siding extended across Learmont Street to Howard's Box Factory, and there you can see the crossing sign in Learmont Street. Once the box factory closed, the line was then moved back to Learmont Street, and then a new buffer stop put in. And for the railway aficionados of infrastructure, you'll look at this buffer stop and you'll say, that's not an 1890s version. That looks like something else. But we can have a full discussion on that afterwards, if anyone's interested. So when the passenger service went, everything was stripped from Buninyong, all the buildings went. Goods sheds and that's what's left of the goods sheds area. So facilities left intact for the odd goods train went, but by 1940 there were no regular services. All the buildings had been removed. And that's looking at it from one of the signals. So you can see the turntable in there, main line there, what's left of the passenger platform. That tree is still there, and what's left of the goods yard. That was the butter factory. Used to use rail. So there we have the yard layout in its final configuration. So just a loop with the passenger platform and the goods platform. So during the war, the army became involved with the town. They had a supply depot there. So goods went to there by rail, and they put back the sign. The sign had been taken down in 1930, but it was put back when the army was there. So this is 1958. Sigh. The rails are gone. So I'll give you a summary of key dates. Memorise these, so next time you're in the pub having an argument with someone, and there are arguments about the closure date. It was 1929, 1930, 1931. So the key dates here, the line opened on the 12th of September 1889, passenger service ceased on the 1st of November 1930. The service was then a goods train as required from 1930. The line was closed beyond Eureka on the 1st of March 1947. Parliament approved the removal beyond Eureka on the 1st of August 1951. The line was pulled up from 1954 to 55. The line after that was a stub, Ballarat East to Eureka. Eureka was viable for many years afterwards until it ran out of loading and was closed in 1986. And one of the reasons for that was that the fuel companies had different ways of distributing their fuel. At Eureka initially, the fuel came in bulk and was decanted into drums. By the 70s, the fuel people are starting to deliver direct from the refineries. So there was no point in pursuing that form of distribution by the mid-80s, so the traffic just ceased. So Eureka siding closed then. So sections of the route were turned over to new uses for housing, tourism and industry from the 1950s to date. So that's why you don't have a continuous rail trail. There's things in the way. Here in Buninyong, we've got two faces of the residual passenger platform. 1989, there's the rail centenary with the sign. Today, we've got the men's shed. So the passenger platform has been chopped around across here, where most of the yard is most of where the yard was is now the swimming pool and the childcare centre. There's a couple of those trees I showed in the former thing. Now, cracking the platform in the 1940s, and they're still doing it. Toot toot, this presentation is departing now. The end.